Richard, welcome to
Hi.
the show. Great to
Thank you
see
for
you.
having me. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I am super excited for the conversation. So,
Oh my.
your organization, the Leverage Ed Foundation, you guys work with leaders all across the country and support leaders. You have a unique pulse on what's going on at the ground
You too.
level. And so, let's start with a quick intro on yourself and maybe just a little bit about the work the foundation does.
Absolutely. I am Dr. Richard Seigler-Carter. I am a managing director at the Leverage Ed Foundation. I was on the founding team. We started 7 years ago. But before starting Leverage Ed, I was an educator for the last almost 17 years. Started off as a dance teacher of all things, then taught kindergarten, became a dean of students, became a principal, director of culture, and then I managed a portfolio of 14 schools, 14 high performing schools at a charter organization in New York City, and supported in helping to develop their teacher onboarding and training program. We trained about 700 teachers that year, and that kind of fueled my both urgency and passion around teaching people and supporting people and developing people, to do their jobs exceptionally well on behalf of students and families. Leverage Ed is an operating nonprofit foundation in the sense that we do not collect money for our services. All the services that we deliver are through grants, through acts of service. And so we are investing very intentionally in leaders who oftentimes have finances as a barrier to entry. There are a host of programs that are great, but cost a lot of money. And as you know, schools are not places that have unlimited resources. And so we really want to be able to make sure that we're offering services and experiences to folks that can help them develop without the price tag.
I love it. So you mentioned, personally being part of a 700 person, I think you said 700 person onboarding process
It was a lot.
training program. And,
Yes.
um, Leverage Ed has this focus on people development, which I love. You referenced it's not always accessible to get really high quality leadership development, and I think a lot of times it's tempting to focus on just the academics side of school performance, and you all have this sort of unique focus on the leaders themselves, the people development side. Tell us why that's your thesis. Like, unpack that a little bit for us. Why do you think people development, particularly for leaders, sometimes gets overlooked or maybe underinvested in?
Yeah, I think, that's a very interesting question. I think a lot of people see this issue differently, and I think we welcome those varying perspectives. From our perspective, you could have the best laid curriculum, but people teach students. A curriculum doesn't teach students. Now, you need high quality materials. Don't get me wrong. That's super important. But without strong, empowered leaders who are equipped to navigate those challenges to inspire other people, we don't believe that you'll actually see meaningful or sustainable change. And so we're tackling this issue from the people perspective, right? Leaders are the levers of change in their respective buildings and their communities. And without investing in their capacity, you're getting more of the same. And so you won't really be able to take a curriculum and bring it to life. You won't be able to differentiate for your adults and for your students if a leader isn't equipped with the skills to be able to do that. And I think as a sector, if you think about medical professionals, they go through hours and years of simulated practice before they're allowed to do the job. Yet we hand people the keys to the car after they have gone through school for a few years and probably done some pre-service training. But we believe that educators need support. We believe that they need at bats. They need opportunities to fail safely. And then they need to be continuously invested in so they can actually deliver results for students and families and stay in the profession for as long as humanly possible.
So you talked about, curriculum doesn't teach students, people teach students, and people also manage people.
They
And
do.
it is probably, I mean, for anyone that's been a manager or is currently a manager, I think all of us can attest that it's not a skill you rarely feel like, wow, I'm really good at people management and performance management. It's not something that I think a lot of people feel super confident in. And like you were mentioning, we see in other professions just a totally different approach to training and development. And so tell us a little bit more about the status quo when it comes to people and performance management. Like, what does that typically look like today in schools? And what do you think are some of the biggest missed opportunities as you think about this as a category?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I think to take a step back, I think we look at teachers, for example, who have had exceptional success in their classrooms and have demonstrated a sense of sort of a leadership capacity to be able to take even members of their grade team and support them in improving their practice for the students they serve. And then we make the assumption that those teachers are going to be naturally amazing people managers and people leaders. And that's not actually true. That's a very different skill set, I would argue, right? And I
Mhm.
think that we underinvest in supporting leaders in developing their people management capacity. And we think that just because they've gotten results in their classroom, they can automatically do that and transfer those skills and transfer that knowledge to other people. And it doesn't quite work that way. And I think a lot of times we get stuck in a cycle of that underinvestment, and either because of budget constraints or a short-term focus on a goal. But we know that investing in people leads to better student outcomes in the long run. And for some reason, I think that we have made a lot of false assumptions around that. And again, just like a curriculum doesn't teach students, a person, people, a team leads other people. You've got to be able to have the skill sets to kind of differentiate and support folks because we're not all one size fits all. We're very different people. We have very different lived experiences. People have different levels of capacity. And so, as a leader, you need to be able to address and meet the needs of your community. You cannot do that if you are not invested in yourself.
You mentioned just this idea that it's not one size fits all, which
Mhm.
is, ironically a concept as educators, many of us former teachers, where it's like, of course,
Yeah,
differentiated instruction. We
of
do this
course.
with our kids.
Yes.
And yet it doesn't always get applied to the adult context and particularly around performance management. Can you provide a couple specific examples of how the one size fits all approach really falls short when it comes to managing adult professionals in a school setting? Where, like, what are the types of pitfalls you see when schools take this sort of, one size fits all PD approach?
Yeah. I think performance and people management is inconsistent, right? It usually looks like annual reviews that don't really go beyond sort of checking a box. I mentioned this whole one size fits all PD. Imagine you have a bunch of leaders eager, right? But let's say there's 400 of them. They all come to an auditorium and we sermonize and say, this is how we're going to lead the school, or you should lead your school this year, et cetera. But we're making an assumption that all 400 people have exactly the same needs, have exactly the same motivations, are facing the exact same challenges. And we kind of pitch to the middle, hoping that we're getting as many as humanly possible. And anybody who may or may not get it will speak up. And hopefully there's an opportunity to sort of get some things that might improve your capacity to kind of get back to the middle. But that's simply not true. And we would never take that stance when it comes to students, right? If you had 40 students in the classroom, though that is a lot, but sometimes it happens, right? It would never be acceptable for us to say, well, we're going to get the majority of them, and hopefully the rest will kind of fall in place. And
Right.
so that one size fits all approach makes a lot of assumptions that are not true. And I also think that we don't ask the leader what it is that they need, right? I mean, you just ask them, what is it that you need? What are you struggling with? And then find opportunities and find the resources to be able to meet those needs. And so while I do think there is value in everyone hearing the same message at the same time and having a common experience, we also need to look beyond that common experience and say, well, where do the paths now diverge, right? And what might you need versus what might you need versus what might you need to be incredibly impactful in the shortest amount of time with the biggest bang for our buck? And that's a really hard question to ask ourselves. And I think that if we're taking the approach as people who are developing leaders, sometimes we don't have the answer and we're afraid to say that. But my perspective is everything is figure outable. We're going to find the answer. But at first, we have to make um, a real investment in understanding that one approach is not going to get us all the way there.
Okay, so I know there's people listening to this who are school leaders, principals, executives at large networks who are thinking, yes, all of what you just said, Richard, resonates with me. We could have a much more robust approach to performance and people management. But, and there's often a but,
Usually a but.
uh, these objections start bubbling up, but we don't have X, Y, or Z, or how would we practically implement this? Before we get into some of the practical tactical solutions, like what are the typical common objections you hear as you're talking to people about the importance of people management? What's the pushback you get? Because at
Yeah.
face value, I think a lot of us would say, you hit the nail on the head. We should totally be doing this better.
Yeah.
What are the barriers?
Yeah. First, I've never met a school leader or a manager of leaders who has not wanted to meet the needs of all of their leaders. Like I fundamentally start from a place that everyone wants to be able to do that. And so that's kind of where it starts. But some of the objections or some of the real realities is that people don't have the resources or the depth of performance management themselves or at their organizations to be able to do this exceptionally well. And that is a real barrier. We also see people who have been doing this work for a number of years, who have gotten incredible results, right, on their own. And they believe because they themselves are still there, that it will be fine. I can save it if and when it goes off the rails. And so they may unintentionally underinvest in systematizing this in such a way where they can transfer this knowledge and multiply talent across their organization. And I think oftentimes people then pendulum swing to say, well, this is the system that we're using. It's worked for us for X period of time. And we're not necessarily willing to try new things because it's gotten some level of success. So I'm going to kind of stay the course. I'm going to keep the
Mm,
blinders on and do exactly what I've been doing because it's worked for the majority of our people, even though it's not worked for all of our people. And so I can't say that's necessarily an objection per se, but it's a shift in mindset, I think. And I think the last piece of it is I think they believe that you either have it or you don't, meaning people are natural born leaders, which there
right.
are people who have natural gifts to kind of galvanize communities and can be exceptionally inspirational. And they think that either it's the have or have nots. And I personally don't believe that that's the case. And so I can't say that's an objection either, but it's more so a mindset. And I think it
Right.
takes a mindset shift to say, we need systems and structures, yes. We need content and support, yes. But we need a way for all of those things to kind of work together. And then we need to look at our people as people and understand that each of us have individual needs and each of us have a runway to success that will not look like the other person next to them. And while it will be great for everyone to have a personal coach, it usually is one person managing many people and we're outnumbered, right? But I think the first thing we have to look at is what systems and structures do we already have that are working? What has not worked and why has that not worked? What is my own capacity as a manager? What support do I need to be better for my people? But then the fundamental shift to say, as a manager, my job is to multiply and replicate talent on the ground. And if I'm not able to do that, I need more support in finding out either a group, a person, or some sort of literature that allows me to invest in myself as a performance manager to gain better results for myself and then in turn gain results for people that I support.
I want to add one to your list or ask you about one additional. I'll also use the term mindset because I don't think it's necessarily an excuse. I do think it's a perspective. I think sometimes around performance management, especially in education, it can feel a little bit uncomfortable because, when you think about our mission with students, we're constantly trying to ensure that we're creating an environment where everything is uplifting. We are bringing students, along together. We are, coaching and cultivating excellence. And I think sometimes when we try to apply that to our adult performance management, it can feel a little bit like, well, we're not a business, we don't
Yeah.
want to like manage talent out of our organization if they're not rising to the challenge, or this feels too much like a corporate culture. How do you respond to people who have that maybe like mindset or feeling associated with kind of your classic performance management you might see in the business world and might say, well, that doesn't belong in in an educational environment?
Yeah. Sometimes I struggle with that mindset if I'm being perfectly honest with you, because on one hand rather, there is a sense that schools are inherently different, right? That we are far more relational than a corporation, if you will, right? We are a human centered business. Learning is our sort of bread and butter. And if we're able to do that well, we understand that there's a bit of a finesse to that, right? There's a bit of a flow to that. Whereas businesses, usually people think of being rigid. There's no room for iteration. There's no room for exploration. You do or you don't. But that does not mean those schools are not businesses from that perspective. It doesn't mean we can't borrow valuable lessons from the business world when it comes to managing people, right? So a great business focuses on developing their employees, building a winning strategy, understanding how resources are allocated, and kind of figuring out how to measure its impact based on the investments, right? And so why not do the same for educators who are shaping the future of our kids, right? And so from our perspective, strong leadership and management frameworks can be adapted, right, to support unique missions in schools. It's not either or. And so I think we just need a very clear framework about what that looks like and how we can take business principles and apply them to schools. We see schools do it all the time and they're exceptionally successful at doing that. I think what they understand is how do we then take the structures, but then think about the people? And you
Mm,
have to have both for things to work exceptionally well. Now, for those of us who believe that schools are businesses, right, there are two big pillars to schools, right? There's the academic and cultural health of the organization. And then there's the business side of things. You got to keep the lights on, right? You got to
yep.
have the cash flow. You got to have money in hand or operations. And so we are actually doing both. And I think a lot of times we bifurcate things. The operations team and the business team is over here. The instructional leaders and the educators are over here. And rarely do we actually bring both worlds together, which I believe is a missed opportunity.
Totally agree. Yeah, couldn't agree more on that. All right, well, let's talk about breaking down performance management a little bit. And you mentioned at the top of the call, different people have different approaches to this. And certainly, you know, books and books and books have been written on performance management in the sort of, you know, broader corporate sector. But I'm really curious, like, if you could break down for us how you guys think about performance management at Leverage Ed, how you coach leaders around this. Like, what's your framework for people who are saying, okay, like, help me do this better? Where should I start? Where do you guys think about that?
Yeah. By no means have we made something up on our own. We've kind of also borrowed from the research and, perspectives that we have found to be successful. Now, I think one of the things that we struggle with as educators, and it's always well intentioned, is that I think sometimes we overcomplicate things.
Mm,
We believe, though there are many different sub bullets to what I'm going to say next, that the fundamental approach one should take is really improving practice around leading yourself, leading other people, and leading systems, right? And I think if you think about performance management, you think about development across those three domains, it allows us to simplify and streamline a bit what it is we're trying to actually do and hold ourselves accountable for the results that we yield as a result of those inputs, right? And so let's start with leading and managing yourself, right? First of all, do I know who I am as a leader? Do I know my strengths and weaknesses? Do I know my triggers? Do I know how other people experience me? Do I know kind of you know, what I need to improve on? And is there a continuous process for me to gain feedback, gain experiences for self improvement? Right? Because if you are not healthy as a leader, you cannot effectively manage other people. And you definitely can effectively manage systems and structures that are meant to hold all the different parts of the schooling experience up. And so we help leaders to really think through how would you develop yourself and what resources and experiences do you need to do that? When you're thinking about leading and managing other people, a lot of times, and people don't like this word, but you have to identify the things that are exceptional strengths, but also diagnose with very clear specificity the root causes of underperformance. And then what does differentiated leadership look like in practice when supporting adults with diverse needs, right? Because adults are learners too, right? Learning doesn't stop when you finish school formally. We are all learners, should be lifelong learners, that is. And as such, we have very diverse needs. And so as a leader, I need to be able to meet my people where they are and support them in getting them to be exceptionally successful, regardless of what that looks like. And I think that we don't think of leadership in that way all of the time. I think when we think about leading other people, it's like, great, have I cleared the way for them to do their jobs effectively? Yes or no? Have I
mm,
invested in a great schedule? Right? Do people have swag? Am I doing happy hours? Am I running PD? Am I observing classrooms and giving feedback? And all of those things are necessary, but they're insufficient if we are not looking at truly why someone's successful and how to make them even more successful. Why is someone not successful? And what experiences and support do they actually need to get better at their jobs? And I think leading other people is a very heavy thing to do. We make mistakes all day long. And I think sometimes we think of ourselves as supporters in the work versus managers in the work. We are people developers. We're not just cheerleaders. And you need both, don't get me wrong, right? But I think we are not necessarily always honest with ourselves around we do this thing called school all day long, and we don't necessarily interrogate the source of underperformance. We don't even want to call it that. We call it glows and grows, right? And while that is necessary, it is insufficient in moving adult practice. And then systems, we make decisions all day long. I forget what the research says about how many hundreds of decisions we make as school leaders in a day, but your systems instructors, help keep your school healthy. And so those systems and structures could look anything like your top 10 systems in your school, arrival, dismissal, you name it, you got it, right? Operational health, for example, instructional management, right? What are all the systems you need to make sure the academics are healthy, teachers are getting what they need? And if you can't manage that very well, you could have the best curriculum, you could have insanely talented people, but something is going to fall apart if those things are not strong.
So talk to us about diagnosing each of these. I think the framework is super helpful, leading and managing yourself, leading and managing others, and leading and managing systems. And I do think it's really clear to bucket the broader overarching topic of performance management into core pillars. How do you all recommend people, like, let's just focus on diagnosing this, because whether or not any attention has been given to this, there's existing processes in place for whether or not people are managing themselves, people and others. And you can speak from, experience of the work you guys do at the foundation or personal experiences. How do you all help leaders dig into each of these buckets and do some diagnosis to say, okay, where are we at? Like, what's our status quo before we start working on, okay, we all need to manage ourselves, and we need to manage others, and we need to fix our systems. I guess, like, what's the starting place is the question I'm really trying to ask.
Yeah. Regardless of the program that we're running at Leverage Ed, we have a few programs under the Leverage Ed umbrella. No matter what program we are in, we first start with understanding who you are as a leader, right? There are open access materials like DISC and Enneagram. And while a lot of times people roll their eyes when they hear that, it is a very, very useful tool to understand the things that energize us and the things that drain us, right? We have to code switch all day long. And it's really important that you understand where you fit in, what are your drivers, what are the things you avoid, and how you tend to show up for other people. And so no matter what program you're in, that's where we start, because I think we're trying to make very clear that you as a leader are the lever of change here. And then in terms of how do you then unpack and diagnose and find the root cause, I'll use one of our programs, Launchpad, for this example. And so we spend a lot of time with leaders really unpacking their artifacts, their data. And we have three domains, right? Instruction, because you need that. Culture, because you need that. And also systems instructions, because you need that in order for sort of school to be healthy and be a place where everyone can thrive. And so we conduct a school health assessment, which is not dissimilar from any other walkthrough that I think we call it different things, different places, and that's fine. But there's a lot of investment in the pre-work around that. Do you understand the types of things you should be looking at, the types of things you should be collecting, the type of things you should be doing? That gives us a very clear sense as to how healthy your school actually is across all of those domains. We have leaders self-assess, right? Because we're trying to understand what is your bar, and not from a punitive standpoint, but we need to understand where we're seeing things that are similar and where we're not quite seeing the same thing and why that might be the case. We as a team then go into your school and partner with leaders to then do a school walkthrough. And it's not just a performative walkthrough. We often say, don't give us the donor tour. We want to know all the things that are actually going on, because it
Right.
is from that perspective that we're able to help you plan and support you more effectively. And so we look at the types of feedback that leaders are giving to their leaders. We look at feedback on top of feedback. How are teachers giving feedback to kids? What do your systems instructions look like? What does your schedule actually look like? How do you run leadership meetings? How do you run planning meetings? How do you follow up? How do you talk to parents? What is the sort of the staff satisfaction within your building? And how healthy are those things? What are the indicators of the stress, to use that language, that we're seeing? And what is also not being said? What are some strengths that you haven't even tapped into that can support your community to be even better, even faster? And we have that real honest conversation. And then we look at what goals have been set for leaders, right? We know that we are guests in people's buildings. And so our job is to figure out, how do we take the goals that you were given? How do we see what we're seeing on the ground? What does that make us think? What do we believe is at the root of that underperformance? And then help you build a strategy, if you will, and improve your capacity to fix those things very quickly. And while we are under no delusion that it does take a lot of time to kind of make a school healthy over the course of a number of years, if the
Hmm.
leader has the tools that they need, it is far more likely that change will happen. And so a
Right.
lot of times people go in and they try to fix the thing. Great. We suffer from a plague of, you know, a lack of rigorous questioning. So they go in and they try to fix the questioning. But like, no, no, pause. There's a reason why that has happened. Is it because the curriculum is weak? Is it because you have underinvested in training people? Is it because the feedback from the leader isn't really good? Until you find out the root cause, and I think you will then not be able to align a strategy that will work. It will constantly be a series of inputs. And from my perspective, and I think all of our shared perspective, this work is urgent. We don't have the time to kind of play games. And so we really need to understand what it is that we're trying to fix and try to fix it very quickly. So go back to your question about how you diagnose. You got to see it. You got to look at all the indicators. You have to really study and ask ourselves and each other the hard questions, and then put a plan in place that takes the leader as a lever of change and not kind of hide in a lot of these ministerial tasks that we tend to do. Not because those tasks won't work, but I think we've underinvested in this idea that the leader is the source of that change. And so we need to know what's wrong. Then we need to know what strengths the leaders already have, and if we know what the strengths that they have, then allows us to then figure out and support how to build the capacity for things that they don't have. And that is how we have partnered with leaders to really invest in themselves and also, frankly, make real changes on the ground.
Could you give us an example, maybe from the Launchpad program? Because you were just talking about how you all approach this work through that particular program, of how you worked with a particular school leader. You don't have to name them, but maybe on, coaching through one of these lenses, whether it's self-awareness as a leader and in managing yourself, or whether it's a blind spot in managing others, and how the support and coaching around that changed a behavior that led to a particular outcome or cultural change. I'm curious, just make it real for us with an
Sure.
example.
Sure. To make sure that I'm not giving too much away on that leader. All of our leaders are exceptionally talented. Now, there is, to be clear, there is an application process through which leaders go through so that we can make sure that folks are ready for this work. And so one of the examples is we have leaders who, with the best of intentions, are scared to press teachers, are scared to press their leaders because, let's face it, we don't have exceptional teachers just walking around in the store. There's a shortage of folks in this
Mhm.
work, and people are very nervous about not having people in front of kids. And that's a very real challenge, and that should not be diminished whatsoever. But this leader in particular was scared of upsetting people. And so, therefore, they either reinforced bad habits, did not name the issues that they were seeing, and they kind of danced around the issue. And I think their teams realized that very quickly and took this leader on a ride, if you will. And so, part of us going in there, we noticed things like people are not coming to staff meetings on time. Like that's like baseline.
Mhm.
You are giving feedback in the form of suggestions, and no one is listening to anything you're saying. You're tackling symptoms and not going to root cause. You are blaming, unfortunately, you may be blaming children unintentionally, but that's the way that it's coming across. And it all stems from this idea that you are scared to say the things, and you also don't have the capacity right now to fully understand and interpret and articulate why this thing is actually happening. And so being able to be their eyes and ears, if you will, or a second set of eyes and ears on the ground, allow them to realize that, oh, actually, I'm avoiding this issue. And if you think about how they naturally communicate, that leader was scared of conflict. And so while that's not a revolutionary thing, I think we were able to really name what the source of this leader's underperformance was. It wasn't that they weren't talented. It wasn't that they weren't an exceptional pedagogue. It wasn't that they didn't have systems and structures. They did not know how to lean in and give feedback that would move people's performance and manage through resistance. And so we were then able to simulate those experiences with them to kind of pinpoint at what point did you become scared? Where did you trip up? What did you say? What was my reaction if I'm taking on the persona of the person that you feel challenged by? What are you naturally inclined to do? And what are some real world tools we can give you and experiences we can give you to help build that mental model. So when you are in that situation, you have to address that. You're far more, I would say, prepared, and you have far more capacity to kind of navigate the ride that that person might take you on and still lead and still come out on the other end, addressing the issue, building up people's capacity and getting the result. And that's not a one and done kind of thing. That takes a lot of time and iterations and practice. But that leader is far more confident in being able to do that, has overcome that issue for the most part. The teacher or teachers that were doing that with them, in fact, even the leadership team that took them on that ride, are no longer doing that because they now know that leader will address things graciously, but firmly to make sure that everything is moving in the right direction. And I think that goes back to my earlier point around surgeons get hundreds of hours practicing in simulations, pilots, the same thing. CEOs, school leaders, EDs, we don't get that in the same way. And so we try very hard to create those simulated experiences that allow people to fail safely before they actually have to do it with their faculty.
Such a good example. I mean, if you can't relate with that example, you've never had to manage people. It is incredibly uncomfortable to hold people accountable, to address conflict. So yeah, I really appreciate that example. I think probably most people can empathize with that experience. So I want to ask about, like, as we come to a close here, I always like to try and land the conversation with some really practical next steps. And I'm thinking about maybe a under resourced leader,
Yeah.
maybe a small single site school. They're not in a program like Launchpad yet. Maybe they will be one day.
We hope so. We hope so.
And and they want to implement some of this. So, as you were sharing that example, one of the things that came to mind for me was, it's always lonely at the top, right? It's really hard to have staff who can challenge you to see those blind spots because of the inherent dynamic that you are everyone's boss. If you are, if you're at the top
Yeah.
of the pyramid, so to speak, it's hard to have someone who you can have that honest conversation with, who can point out, it seems like you're fearful to address this in the organization. How do you recommend people get started on creating a culture of, self-reflection, inviting feedback,
Yeah.
if they don't feel like they're getting it today? Because I can also imagine there's leaders who are thinking, man, I really hope I'm not doing that, but there's probably things I am doing because I'm a human. I have blind spots. How
Right.
do I, like, should I invite my, you know, chief of staff to try and have these conversations with me? Should I think about, bringing in outside help? What have you all seen to be effective for those leaders who, don't have that, outside performance management coach there to say, pause, let's dig into this, let's simulate this?
Yeah. That's such a good question. We believe in community, and I think we all do. I think that's a kind of I would hope, a widely held belief. And I should have started from the very beginning. A lot of the leaders we support face exactly what you just said. It is very lonely at the top. And the more you ascend roles within an organization is the least developed or the less developed you are, right? We often find that CEOs, there's no CEO school, right? If you will. We wish there was.
Right.
Um, and so it is lonely. And we advise people to find other folks, whether it be geographically aligned and right, like a person down the street who's also leading a school, build authentic relationships with them in order to get in their listening and allow them into your space as well. The best learning happens, we would argue, together. But let's just say you don't have that. It first starts, and this is again pretty low level, it starts with naming what exactly are you trying to accomplish? And have I built systems around making sure that I know with exact specificity that I'm actually meeting that goal or I'm far away from it? And it starts with setting clear expectations and making sure every member of your staff understands what success actually looks like. And it doesn't have to be perfect from the start, but just consistent and thoughtful, right? And I think cheering people on when things are going exceptionally well and inviting them to give you feedback as well. As a principal, one of the things that I used to do, people would cringe when I would do it, but we had meetings called family business. And I had a poster chart and I invited my faculty to tell me all of the things that they thought were going wrong. I was trying to model in that moment what it looked like to get really critical feedback publicly in a way that demonstrated to them that I was actually listening and committed to changing. The only rule that I had was that I was not able to respond and defend myself. It was more so I could ask clarifying questions to make sure I understood exactly what they meant. And my goal as your leader was every time we came back together, it was on a Wednesday, I would cross off at least one of the things off their list to address that concern. And in doing that, I was modeling how to receive critical feedback in a way that I wasn't defensive. I was honoring their experiences because remember, I said in the beginning, you don't experience yourself. And it changed the way that they perceived my feedback. So even if I gave feedback and didn't quite land the way I wanted it to, I got far more grace than had I not done that. I think also to rehearse conversations. I know that sounds silly. Teachers do teachbacks before they go in front of children. Leaders can do teachbacks with other leaders before they go in front of their adults. And so, really help people or have people in your corner, whether that be your friend, your spouse, another leader who can play the part of the person or can play the scenario out in real time around the things that might trigger you and find ways to navigate that so that when you are actually in that situation, you have something to draw on. I think we undervalue the importance of practice and mental modeling things and playing things forward. And I think that's a mistake. I think the more that we invest ourselves in practice, the better we are. And I'm unapologetic around who I will ask for that. Again, you can ask your spouse, ask another leader. You can ask a trusted teacher, someone on your team who knows you and knows your intent, who will allow you to fail safely before you go out in front of other people.
Love it. All right. Well, as we come to a close here, any recommended resources for our listeners? We've talked about a lot of different concepts here. Any go-to books, online resources, things you find yourselves recommending to leaders that we can link in the show notes?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things we have heard before, Radical Candor by Kim Scott kind of drives people to creating cultures of feedback and growth. Thanks for the feedback from Douglas Stone and Sheila Heen. I think that focuses more on like normalizing feedback and building awareness. Our go-tos are the main idea. The Kim Marshall, again, most of us know those resources as well. But I also think is using your own lived experiences as your case studies, right? A lot of things can be learned if we replay them out in real time or post-mortems, if we call them, right? And so I would not devalue looking back to say, what are some of the experiences and challenges that I had? And let's walk through what I actually did and see how effective it was or wasn't. And then what I should have done or could have done differently to yield a different outcome. I think oftentimes we look outside of ourselves. And while that is important, a lot of learning happens if you just replay the steps that you made or the missteps that you made, and then find different ways to move forward.
Yeah, totally agree. It's funny how common that practice is, and like you mentioned, you know, other industries. The one that comes to mind for me is the military. I mean, if you have any
Mhm.
friends or colleagues who are either
Yeah.
currently or former military, the military takes people from all walks of life and they put them through very stringent performance management. And
They
all
do.
day long, they're doing after action reports. They're dissecting decisions made
Mhm.
and course correcting. And we can take a lot of those principles and apply them. So I definitely appreciate that encouragement. All right. So for people interested to connect with you, Richard, or learn more about the Leverage Ed Foundation or some of the programs you guys offer, where should we send them?
Yes, you can go to our website, leverageedfoundation.org. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn or any other member on our team. And we'd love to be able to hear from you. We are always energized by being able to be in proximity and community with other passionate leaders. And so please do look us up. One of the things you will notice is that we are just trying to make a difference in the world of education. And while we are pro bono, doesn't mean that people's time is free. And so we really want to make sure that when people engage with us, they feel that they have now found their people and found their community in a space that often feels lonely, as you mentioned.
Perfect place to end. Thanks
Yes.
again for coming on, Richard. Really
Thank
appreciate
you. I
your time.
appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@byq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.